Welcome to She Sells Radio. I am so excited because today I get to bring you an absolutely phenomenal woman, a phenomenal human being. What's fun is she was one of our very first graduates of the 10K Club, and you're going to hear
That's right.
today like what she has done. But it's so incredible to see her story and what she's built in just what I would say is a few short years. So I'll share with you her professional bio, and then we're going to get into the conversation. Allison Hare, my guest today, is a former corporate sales executive who left the corporate world to coach women, especially high performing working moms. We got a lot of those in this community to redesign their best lives without burnout. As an executive consultant specializing in sales, personal branding, podcast coaching, marketing, and personal transition strategy, she's the host of the award winning top 1.5% globally ranked podcast, Late Learner, and a keynote speaker. She founded the Effective Collective membership designed to connect high performing women that want to powerfully live, work, and play in full alignment. Allison, welcome to She Sells Radio. This has been a long time coming, and I
I
am
know. I'm
so,
so
so
glad to
excited
be
today.
here. Can
Oh
I
my
share a
God.
story about you about this?
Yeah,
Because
I don't know what it
I
is. I'm
think it's
like,
important. No, I
yeah,
think
go
it's
for it.
important because as you were talking about like the 10K club, right?
Yeah.
I remember you were putting together your very first retreat. And I follow
Mm,
you, like I watch you. And I remember looking at that retreat and I'm thinking in my head, I'd love to go, but I'm going to tell her no. Like you hadn't asked me, like I
yeah.
knew at some point we would be in contact. And
Yeah.
I remember going, yeah, maybe later or maybe some other time. And then you asked me, and I was like, yeah, I'll do it. And it changed my life. It
Oh,
changed my life. Isn't that funny that we
wow.
try and convince ourselves that we should not do the thing that we should? And then
Yes.
you do the opposite because you know it'll be for the greater good. And
Yes.
it was so much beyond my expectations and the
Mm,
people, I'm still in contact with the people from there, but you really do
wow.
put together an amazing community. And I thought
Oh,
it would be worth sharing because that was very pivotal in my mind of just,
oh,
like you're always becoming, right? You're always
yes.
becoming the next version of, and you played a pivotal part in it. So thank you.
Oh my gosh. Thank you for sharing that. It's so funny. This morning, I was thinking about our interview and I thought about, for some reason, that I remember you had said that about the retreat, and that popped in my mind. And I was like, oh my gosh, that feels like a million years ago. It wasn't, it was just a few short years ago.
Yeah.
But I so appreciate that. And I think when I look at what you've done and created in your life, and we're going to talk a lot today about reinvention,
Yeah.
it's just really powerful to see when you kind of like in that moment where you put the fears aside and you say, you know what? I'm going to do the thing that I would do if I was at the end result, right? I'm going to put the money objections aside, the time objections behind, maybe age objections behind. A lot of women have stories or men have stories about, I'm too old to do this. It's too late. I'm too far behind. I don't have the money. I don't have the resources. And we just say yes and get ourselves in the room or launch the thing and get ourselves out there. Like, it's like, what would have happened if we hadn't said yes to those things? So anyway, I say all of that to say, I would love if you could share a bit of your own story around reinvention. So someone can hear your bio and hear like corporate sales executive, top performer, right? Crushing it. And you've completely reinvented your life in just a couple short years. So maybe share a little bit about what that looked like, what the story was behind that. And then we'll pull out some pieces that are going to help anyone who's really ready for their own reinvention.
Sure. Thank you for asking.
Yeah.
So I think when I was a teenager, I was raised by a stay-at-home mom of six children. And
Mm,
she used to tell me and my sisters, Allison and my sisters, never rely on a man to make money. Always make your own. And so I heard that so much, it was beat into my head
mm,
because she did not make that choice. And I don't feel like when my parents divorced, she didn't have options.
mm.
She didn't, and there's no judgment around being a stay-at-home mom. I just feel
Yeah.
like she was looking to us to kind of change her story. And so I took that And I became a complete workaholic, and I worked in very male dominated spaces, was the high income earner. I was never, ever going to be left in a place where I didn't have money. I didn't have opportunity. I was stuck. My mother ended up dying sick and penniless, really, and just was chronically ill, very overweight, and I think a lot of untreated depression that lasted her whole life. And I took that as like, well, I'm going to go the opposite direction. Sometimes we look at our parents and we're like, I want to be just like them. And some are like, I'm out. I'm in the opposite direction.
Yes.
And so I would work and work and work, and was really proud of like the strong work ethic. And my father was also a workaholic and an international man. He was from Lebanon. He's still from Lebanon, but he would travel all around the world. And so I felt like my life was trying to prove to my mom and to my dad and to myself that I could do all the things that my mom wished she could have done. And I got to the point where I have a degree in broadcasting. When I was younger, all I wanted to do is be on the radio. And at every opportunity in my life, I had the creative thing, and then I had the stable money thing. I always picked the stable money thing and said, the creative thing, I'll just do it on the side. It'll just be for fun. But that creative side kept getting louder and louder. And I also think it's interesting to note that I had convinced myself that the creative thing would not equal money. And so the answer was always money, right? Like money, stability. If I have money and stability, I can deal with the rest. And so I did earn the trips and did all the sales incentive trips, and had a really, I guess, impressive career on paper. But I found that the more I got deeper into it, the more I felt I was completely out of alignment, and that all of these creative things kept coming up and coming up and coming up, where it felt like the mask that I was wearing at work was like trying to come off, and I couldn't figure out how to keep it on. And what that looked like was being exhausted, was not feeling like I don't know if it was cared, because I desperately cared about my job because I wanted to keep it. I wanted to do really well, but it didn't come as easy to me as maybe some of the creative stuff, like the podcasting and speaking and things that I felt like I was born to do, but just was not giving it a voice, all puns intended. And so connecting with you and connecting with what would it look like? And I remember at that retreat that truly was life-changing. My goal for that year, that the coming year, because it was December, was to leave my corporate job. And I did. And you kind of set the boundaries for that, but I had no idea what I was going to do. And and I ended up leaving on purpose without a plan, which I don't recommend. But I think I got to the point of like truly profound burnout, where it was really impacting my health, my mental health, my physical health. And I had to find another way. And I knew somewhere deep down that I had enough gifts and talents that I could pull it together somehow, if I could just have the time and energy to focus on it. So I ended up leaving. I did a whole bunch of crazy stuff. Like I would do 12-hour walks, and I would do solo overnight hikes, and I would climb the tallest peaks of some of the mountains that I had never experienced before, and would do like psychedelic assisted therapy. Like I was just in it, right? Like I needed to get to the bottom of burnout. And it became really clear as I was coming out of it that I could help women like me. I could help women. I found that the reservoir for my own energy lied in what it was that lit me up, not in what was traditional, or at least what I was conditioned to believe. And I think something that happens, and this is often, over 35, maybe 40, where something happens where you're like, wait a minute, all the stuff that I've been conditioned to believe, that was kind of BS, right?
Yes.
Where you're like, wait a minute, I don't understand that I've checked every single box, but why am I not happy? So you feel guilt and gratitude. Like it's not like you're not grateful for it, but you feel this sense of guilt and shame of like, why can't this be enough? Why do
Mm.
I have this like thing on my heart? It's like almost an agitation that just this weight that will not go away until you tend to it. And
Yeah.
I found that the opening was truly like, where do you find your energy and what is it that lights you up? And kind of giving a little bit more of a platform to that opens up everything for you. So I
Mm.
did end up coaching, and I thought like, well, maybe I'd want to take people on retreats and kind of do some of the crazy stuff that I did, but I could facilitate these events. And I realized, wait, I don't, the retreats are one thing, but I really want to help people long term. I don't want them to go on a retreat and come back and then feel like, all right, I've got it all. Like I wanted to help people. So the retreats are part of a program, that I'm working with people to help them kind of live a more fulfilled life without blowing up their life, unless they want
Oh
to.
gosh. Oh my gosh. I'm sitting here taking so many notes on what you're saying, and it's so fun to hear your story because there's so many commonalities in my own story as well. And I think for many of us, we have this kind of wake up call, and it does tend to happen. Not always. It can be a traumatic event. It can happen later in life. It can happen early in life. But I think for a lot of people, it is somewhere around, I can't believe that this is considered midlife. I don't feel like I'm midlife, but I think technically that's what it is. And for me, it was age 35. And I remember it was based on reading a book by Bronnie Ware, The Top Five Regrets of the Dying. And
Hmm.
have you read, are you familiar with the book?
No, but I'm familiar with the
Oh,
concept. Yeah.
yeah. And it's very aligned with what you teach and do in your community. But yeah, hospice care workers sat on people's deathbeds, and she said there were five common regrets they all shared. And the number one regret was, I wish I had had the courage to live a life true to me rather than what everyone else expected of me.
Yes.
And whoa, like that for me was such a wake up call because I looked around and it was exactly the same as what you said, where you look and you're like, okay, things are good. And I think probably many of our listeners might resonate as, driven, ambitious, high achieving women and men who are listening, where things in your life are probably good by a lot of people's standards. Maybe they're not, but probably for most listeners, you could say, yeah, my life is good. But where's the wow? Like, where's the pizzazz? Where's the like, oh my gosh, my life is amazing that I thought it was going to be? And so you talk about that wake up call for yourself and
Hmm.
realizing how much things were out of alignment. And there's a lot I want to ask you about from your story that you shared. But I think the first thing I want to ask is, if someone is looking at their life right now and they're realizing, wow, maybe they've known for a while, maybe they're listening to this and kind of opening up to it for the first time. Like, if I'm really honest with myself, there are parts of my life that are just not aligned anymore. They don't feel right. It feels like friction. It feels hard. It doesn't light me up. There can be a lot of fear in looking at that
Hmm.
and being open to making changes. Where does someone start with that? Where do they start?
I'm going to say something a little controversial. It may be
Love it.
controversial. I
Do
have a
it.
little bit of a beef with the personal development industry.
Hmm.
And what I believe is that when we consume ourselves with so much of pathologizing, I have imposter syndrome. I deal
Mm.
with like labeling it, where I do think there is a lot of freedom and liberation and perhaps putting a name to it, but the consumption of it, I believe, keeps us sick. Because what
Mm.
I know about your listeners, and I know this without a shadow of a doubt, there is nothing wrong with you. You are not broken. And
Yes.
so you're not doing things wrong. You have just simply outgrown your container. And
Mm.
so what it looks like when you've outgrown your container is it may feel squished. It may not, that comfortable sweater just may
Yeah.
not feel like it fits anymore. And part of it is like, I call it fractures of light, where it's almost like you're
Mm.
in an egg and you see these cracks and you start like, what if I pushed on this crack? And so
Wow.
I think it's really important to not say that, to not assume that something is wrong with you. and that
Yes.
you are complete and whole. It's just your soul is kind of asking you, it's time to grow. And what does that look like? And that part is scary. It is scary. And there is a grief. There is a grief that comes along with that. And that grief is completely normal.
You were saying that there's a grief that comes with, I think, having outgrown some of the old. And you had mentioned that that grief is completely normal. And I think that's so important to acknowledge, right? Of it is it's a leaving behind of the old to be ready for the new. And there's a beautiful quote that it's not my own quote. I forget whose it is, but there's a beautiful quote I was sharing last week with a group that says, your new life is going to cost you your old one. And I
Mm-hmm.
know in those moments where it's like I've felt like I've got to sacrifice or trade some of my old life to step into the new one, there is a grief in that. So if you dropped after that, I want to hear the rest of what you were saying because I know it was going to be really powerful. So maybe speak to the grief and the transition and then whatever's next
We'll
after
keep
that.
going. Yeah, I do think it is kind of like pain is the price of evolution sometimes. And,
Mm,
I think the grieving part is important to normalize because I feel like the expectation is that you were always supposed to be happy, keep moving, keep moving, keep moving. And I don't mean for that to wallow in it, but like to process it. And that,
mm,
grief may look like recognizing that maybe you've outgrown some people that were once close to you. And that could
yeah.
be a spouse, that could be best friends, that could be business partners. That doesn't mean ditching everybody, but there is a sense of grief. And I think it's important to acknowledge, even post pandemic, that there is a lot of grief that has been kind of part of the fallout that I know, even from a friendship and relationship perspective. I've talked to so many people around this topic where so many people feel like their friendships have transitioned in a way that they aren't quite sure what happened and
Mm,
they don't know how to acknowledge it because it is so subtle, but they don't feel the same safety as they may have once felt. And
yeah.
so part of that grief is just you simply have outgrown the container. What does it look like to perhaps invite maybe some refreshed opportunities, whether it is relationships or just changing your surroundings? And that could even be redecorating. It doesn't have to be pick up and move everything, but there is a grief process. And I don't think that's something that should necessarily be skipped over, but something that can be acknowledged, processed, and moved through
Yeah.
instead of wallowing in it.
Mm. Something else you said so many things that I think are important. One of the things is to me so foundational of knowing there is nothing wrong with you. There is nothing to fix, there is nothing to
Mm-hmm.
change. And I was just talking about it this morning on a live stream. I think you were there for part of it where for so much of my own life I set goals based on lack and not enoughness. And it was an inherent underlying assumption and belief that there was some part of me that wasn't good enough. And if I could just make this amount of money or have this level of business success, then I would be successful and valid and whole. And when we do things from that energy, which I think is how most of us are taught to goal set, and it is pervasive in the personal development industry. So I agree with you. You're always coming from this place of lack. Right. And so what I was sharing this morning and what I'm hearing, I think, in some of what you're saying is coming from this place of wholeness and I'm already good enough. I'm already worthy. I'm already valid. Has nothing to do with anything outside of me. Now, from
Mm-hmm.
this place, what does expansion look like? Right? What does
Yes.
greatness look like for me? So I love that. And the analogy you used of the cracks in the eggshell, I think is so beautiful and the light coming in. I've never heard it said that way, but to me, it's so like visceral and just real. And I know that feeling. If someone is listening to this and they can feel that, right? Like they can feel, okay, there's cracks in the eggshell, my old container.
Mhm.
What I say is like your comfort zone becomes a cage, right? What used to be the comfort zone is now feeling constrictive, but I'm not sure what is on the other side. I heard you say earlier, look to what lights you up, look to what gives you joy. Is that what someone should do? Or is there something like, tell us a little bit about if we're not clear on yet what is next, what is that more expansive version of us, where do we start?
Yeah, I do something. It's a framework called Boom, Room, and Bloom. And so
Oh, I like
the
it.
boom is really finding your energy. And it is the quickest thing to do, especially when you are somebody that is maxed out in your days. You don't
Okay.
have a lot. So it can be hard to figure out where could I even find room when you're packed to the hill. So
Mm.
part of it has to start with what is it that does give you that boom? And so it can be as simple as making a list of 10 quick things that do light you up. And they could be
Mm.
super simple. It isn't like, well, 10 days on a beach in Bali would totally light me up, right? Like it can be just savoring a cup of tea because you
Mm.
can't pound tea like you could coffee,
Yeah.
but like enjoying that, or even taking the time to light a candle, or like those simple things. So it can be even just looking at the moon and noticing how pretty it is, or noticing the wind. So
Mm.
if you can do, and the simplest way to do this, you can walk outside and take 1 minute, only 1 minute. Walk outside, find something that will spark awe in you,
Mm.
something that will spark awe. The quickest thing to do, and you can do this in as little as 10 seconds, really. You can
Yeah.
put your hand on your heart because it will naturally regulate your nervous system. Until you can feel your nervous system start to relax, your shoulders starting
Mm.
to lower. So for you, it could be completely different. You might love to garden or knit or do something like I love pulling weeds. It
Yeah.
gives me an unbelievable amount of joy to pull weeds. I don't want to plant things. I just want to pull them out. Or even like tweezing. I don't know.
Yeah.
Tweezing is very fulfilling for me. So like make a list of 10 things and figure out like where can I prioritize this, and just do it as much as you can. Just give yourself permission. So a lot of this does start with permission, and permission
Mm.
to do something slightly different. So you start small, and again, like those cracks, then you can make that room a little bigger. So the boom is like finding what it is that lights you up, prioritize that. Then you have the ability, the capacity, like time is not renewable, but energy is. And so the
Mm.
more that you find what gives you energy, then you can start to create boundaries and essentially find room where you may not see it today. And once you have a little bit of room, then is the bloom. And the bloom comes in as like creative experiments of like, what would a better life look like? What would a more
Mm.
fulfilling existence? And it doesn't have to be so big of like, I want to become a concert pianist and I've never
Mm.
played piano before. It can be that, but it can be just not getting to Friday where you feel like you are clawing your way to the bed
Yeah.
on
Yes.
Friday afternoon. It is just a different state. And so little by little is how you can do it. And it becomes really a creative exploration. So that kind of
Mm.
circle of that boom, room, and bloom is something that I take my clients through, because sometimes you just need a little bit of sometimes you just need a little bit of permission and an
Mm.
objective voice to kind of help you, direct you. Because I think where people like us, people that are high performing women that are accomplished out in the world, the thought of making a change is great, but there also may be some perfectionist tendencies that of where to start when you have so many different doors you can go in overwhelms you too much where you just stop. And so
Yeah.
having the opportunity to at least get some room is kind of where I'm saying like the boom, room, and bloom. Like start with
Yeah.
energy, then you can find space, and
Mm.
then do creative experiments without the heftiness of like the results and the outcomes, and it having to be this great success. Like you have to give yourself room to fall and to fail,
Yeah.
and even not even to fall or fail, like it's an experiment. So
Mm.
you're playing, so it becomes really like a playground.
Yeah. Wow. I love that. I want to ask about, so I was looking at my notes from what you shared earlier. Um, I think this is an important conversation around limiting beliefs of how we make money and what we've been indoctrinated for many of us who may identify as like high achieving, um, successful women or men, right? And I know it was so interesting to hear your upbringing and how you dove straight into, okay, what's going to make me money? And that was exactly what I did too. And for me, I used to, like when I was a little girl, I thought I'm super creative. I loved art. I loved singing. I loved dance. And then as I went into the business world, it was like, if it couldn't make me money, it didn't matter. I didn't put time into it. I didn't think it mattered. I didn't invest any energy into
Hmm.
it.
Yeah.
And I kind of stopped believing that I was creative for a long time. And I would even say things like, oh, I'm just not very creative. I'm not that imaginative. And now, from where I'm sitting, having learned how to reintegrate those parts of myself, I know that bringing creativity and imagination into business is one of the best tools you can use. And it can actually make you far more money than you were making previously. But I know I had definitely a limiting belief around, if I'm going to make money, it has to be serious. I have to be in a suit. It has to be
Mm.
this way. And I heard some of that in your story as well. And then you made that transition where you were like, I'm just wiping it all off the table and I'm going to go all in, which I love. But how did you learn to reconcile those two? And for someone who maybe they do have a creative interest that like lights their heart on fire or they love it,
Mm.
but they're like, maybe they're working a 9 to 5 that they're just feeling completely burnt out and drained in, but they're afraid, oh, I don't know how I'm going to make money if I'm not doing this or on the
Yeah.
other side of it. Could you speak to that a little bit and how you reconciled that for yourself?
I think it's super important because I would think it is probably I would say the number one reason why people don't make a move is because they are so afraid of changing their LinkedIn title
Yeah.
and being judged and
Wow.
being judged. And I can't tell you how many people I talk to that are like, like, oh, she thinks she's a coach now or a consultant or whatever. And I'm like, are these people that you genuinely care about? And they're like, no, I hated them
Mhm.
when I worked with them. Like
Yeah.
it is so interesting how much the ego is wrapped into this. And I was there, like, I get it. What I have seen from the trends of the people that I work with, there is a redefinition of what success looks like. And what I find is that success can often look like a patchwork of the skills and experience and things that you've worked so hard, but also adding in the creativity that keeps
Yeah.
you making it sustainable and making it more fun. And
Yeah.
so having maybe more of a network or a patchwork of things. So if that's possible, some people would say, what am I going to do? I'm going to quit my law firm because, to become a yoga instructor, maybe, or maybe own a yoga studio. Maybe there is another avenue. And so I just feel like we're in a time now where anything is possible. And there's so many creative options
Yeah.
that were not available to us probably 20 years ago, 30
Mm.
years ago. Whereas
Yeah.
now there are so many creative ways. And again, that is like the creative exploration, but it does require you to experiment. It does require you to try it on and maybe suspend the judgment of what are other people going to think and what are you going to think. And
Mm.
that is that's the work. That's the unlearning. And I
Yeah.
think that you're going to unlearn whether it's on your terms or not on your terms. I would
Mm.
rather it be on your terms
Yeah.
than you being kind of flat on your butt because, or in a hospital somewhere because you've burned yourself into the ground. And I'm not
Yeah.
saying that is going to be your fate, but there is a time when, like either that choice is going to be made for you or you're going to make that choice. And if
Yeah.
you have the capacity to make that choice for yourself, what would it look like to experiment without risk and
Mm.
really be playful with what could that possibly look like and what could be created if you could have a world that is abundant, that allows you to use your wisdom, your experience, your knowledge, your talents, your opinions on the world, what needs to be updated, what is broken, and put that together in a way that is created into a business. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what people do. That's creating a personal brand, really.
Yeah.
And you are the personal brand of kind of leveraging your reputation. But what I think is the crime part is putting like the dancey Elyse on a shelf and the
Mhm.
Elyse that loves to sing on a shelf, because you need to
Yeah.
be businesswoman
Yeah.
Elyse that can sit at a boardroom with a bunch of men and
Right.
talk manly. So
Yeah.
I think it's really more of an integration process than it is
Yeah.
anything else.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yeah. You said a couple things there I want to pull out. And one of them is just knowing, and you said this earlier, your soul wants to expand. So I think that's why we're here. I think that it's about you coming in and learning and connecting with that fullest expression of yourself and having experiences that help you find that. And so, because we're wired for expansion, if we ignore the voice for too long, if we ignore the pull for too long, you will tend to manifest something that may not be pleasant or may not be what you would have chosen, but it's a wake up call. It's an opportunity. And this is why a lot of times when people get a life threatening diagnosis or they have a car accident or a trauma, it's like then they'll actually look around at their life. But what you're saying that I love is we don't have to wait for that. And we can proactively be asking ourselves questions and growing and evolving and be pushing that edge in terms of kind of how we view ourselves and our self concept. And then to the creativity piece, just one thing I would add, because I think what you shared is so powerful, is we can look to models of other people to say, is this belief that I'm holding really true? Like, is it true that
Mm.
creatives don't make money? For some, sure, there's definitely the starving artist paradigm. And if you look at some of the most highly compensated people on the planet, who are they? Musicians, performers, actors, right? So the two are not inherently disconnected. And that doesn't mean that you've got to go be in entertainment to be creative. But if you look at the law of compensation, the amount of money we make and bring in is based on how much of our talent and our creativity we bring to what we're doing. So if you're checking the box in a corporate job, just like taking mechanical action, fulfilling a job description, you're leaving behind so many of your gifts and talents on the table. So you're not nearly maximizing the amount of money you could be making if you brought all of you to that, whether that looks like a promotion in the company, whether it looks like you starting your own company. And I know when I kind of shifted that belief in myself. Like I make way more money now being creative, bringing that energy into our business than I did when I had a belief of, oh, you can't make money that way. So I just think that's so powerful because for a lot of people, when they look into what lights me up, what brings me joy, there is going to be probably an element of creativity or things they used to love when they were kids that they've put to the side or said, oh, that's not practical or I can't
Mm.
make money. But what I love that you're sharing is even if it's not doing that exact thing, what are the elements of it? What are the attributes of it? And how can you start to bring that into the fold, into like that patchwork that you were discussing? So this is amazing. I could talk to you about this for 10 hours and I know we would still have more, but I want to honor your time. So I know you've got some beautiful resources that we'll share, and I'll have you speak
Mhm.
to those in a minute. Let's just wrap with, I think, maybe one final word of advice before you share that. One final word of advice. If you think back to Allison kind of before your reinvention, when you were feeling that pull, but maybe feeling fear, feeling self doubt, feeling worry about leaving behind those things that are known, what would you have told yourself then that you needed to hear that maybe someone in that same space could be benefited from?
I'd love to say that whatever I would have said, I would have listened, but I wouldn't have.
Good point.
I do. I want to be true because
Yeah.
I don't know that I would have listened, but I do
Yeah.
think that I believe that life is the sum of your relationships, not your achievements.
Mm,
And when you invest in the relationships that you have, and the ones that you want to cultivate and meet, life gets so much richer.
yeah.
And that could be as close as the people in your home and people that you that mentor you and cheer you up and lift you up. You can redefine all of that. And that was a really big lesson for me, was
Mm,
kind of shedding maybe some people in my life that were so important at one point, but it evolved in a way that needed to be recategorized. And my little heart and mind took a minute to figure out what that was. But as soon as I started to get my relationships in alignment, everything started to snap into a place where I felt so much more supported than feeling
Mm,
like I was kind of alone on an island and didn't really know who I could trust and support
yeah.
going forward in this, kind of it is uncertain when you leave your corporate career with no plan and or trying to build it from scratch. And
Yeah.
so I have a friend of mine named Renee, and Renee took me aside and said, "Hey, when you leave your job, you need to be absolutely ruthless with who you spend your time with." And I was like, "What do you
Mm,
mean?" And she's like, "It is going to derail you if you have the wrong people there, if people that may mean well, but they're saying you should go get a job, you should go,
yeah.
you should do the things that you've done before, even though you don't feel like it's right in your heart. You should ignore that and do like the safe thing. It will derail you. So you need to be absolutely ruthless with it." And I thought that was really profound advice that obviously I remember today.
Yeah.
But even putting it into practice of having those, your happiness and joy and success is truly the sum of your relationships, not the sum of your achievements.
I love that so much. That's so beautiful.
Or maybe I
Please
did
share.
listen to one thing.
Yeah. You did. There you go.
One piece of advice.
Yeah. No, I think that's amazing advice. And that's amazing advice for anyone, right? Whether they're in a
Yeah.
intentional reinvention phase or not, just remembering that and remembering that richness is about a lot more than money or achievements. But it is those relationships that we surround ourselves with. So yeah, that's beautiful. Share with everyone, please, where can they connect with you? I know you've got a free training or two, a free guide or two that you want to share
Yeah.
as well, which I'd love to get people connected with. So please take a moment and share.
Thank you so much for that. You know how I
Mhm.
was talking about the boom, like what makes you
Yes.
boom? I've got a free download, a free resource that has 40 different ideas, but also a worksheet for you. It's super simple. So if you are busy and just need a little bit of thought joggers, it's the perfect way to do it. You can go to allisonhare.com, hair like the rabbit, two L's and an I, Allison, hair.com/energy. And I would love to hear from you. If you got anything from this, you can DM me on Instagram. I always love to hear from Elise's people and our audience. They're always the best people.
Mm,
And my podcast, Late Learner, I have 200 and I don't know, 30 episodes now.
mm,
Has been an esteemed guest on it.
mm.
I probably need to have you back on.
I would love
But
to.
it was amazing, but would love to hear from you and so
Mm.
grateful for you, Elyse. Thank you for
Oh,
this.
thank you. This was so fun and so profound. And I just know how much of the world right now is feeling this call to reinvent and is maybe feeling lost or uncertain or scared. And I know I've had a couple of defining moments in my life when I felt like it was really time to reinvent. And so I think what you shared today is so powerful and so helpful. And you're a living example that we can do it and we can do it maybe not fearlessly, but we can do it elegantly and we can do it with excitement and we can do it and that there's something better waiting for you on the other side. And so I just so appreciate your story and what you've created and your time today. So thank you.
Thank you, Elyse. It was a
Yeah.
joy.
Oh my gosh. All right. Well, to you, my listener, I know you
Yay.
enjoyed this episode. This was such a beautiful conversation. Go connect with Allison online, grab her download. We'll link everything in the show notes. As always, I'm so grateful for you being a listener of She Sells Radio. We'll see you on our next episode. Bye for now.